Healing at the speed of silver, copper, nitric oxide, and hydrogen. Why do I want to do this? And speed is the operative word here because what's threatening us is very speedy, what's happened, what's manifested. Now, in all my time as a homeopath and helping people heal, I've been focused mostly on what we call chronic, degenerative, debilitating diseases that develop over time, over a lifetime, in fact. Although I was sick from day one, I was the canary in the coal mine for, I think, God's purposes to kind of teach me how to heal so I could help others to do the same or better. What we're dealing with now is a crisis that within chronically ill communities, which is almost everywhere, we have an acute crisis that is threatening our lives, in particular with what's known as a cytokine storm, which is a normal kind of response to an injury, a trauma, an infection, where the immune system responds by sending in cells to promote healing ultimately. But it's triage in the body. It's your body's, emergency room. Now that system, emergency room system of the immune system, can be very specific to an area in need. If it's an injury, acute, or a specific infection, like a boil that kind of pops up in one particular area, it can focus all of its attention there. Or it can be a systemic challenge where the immune system is going everywhere all at once. But in either case, it's a very energy intensive experience. And so when you are quote unquote sick, you feel down, you're like, I got no energy. Why? Because all of the energy used for movement and all the joy and dancing that I can't do, that Joni can, wherever Joni is, she's the dancer. You're suddenly, all of that energy is redirected towards something to keep you alive, to deal with the crisis. Now, in a chronic state of disease, that degenerates over time, and you talk about not having energy. And when I was a young boy to a young man, no energy was my middle name. And I had to overcome it through will and whatever resources I had as a younger person. But to overcome that chronic state of low energy, it wasn't about like the concept of it's a caffeine deficiency, right? Or some kind of stimulant deficiency. It's like, why do I not have energy as a young person? And that's when I met a homeopathic doctor I studied under for over 10 years, who was in his, at the time, 60s, and he was dead from tuberculosis in his 40s in Belgium, basically given up for dead. So he found a way to heal with homeopathy and organic food and doing a better job of caring for this machine, this body. And I was inspired by his energy in his 60s that was way more than me in my 20s. So I saw a living example that said, okay, it's possible that no matter how rotten I feel now, somebody's been worse off or is worse off than me and that has found a way back. This is the point of living examples, why we must be living examples for each other. And we talked about in the opening round when I started yesterday about being an inspiration for others to not live in the fear that we are all feeling. And also on the panel yesterday, I felt so good. It was really uplifting overall. It was empowering. And I've been commenting about all y'all, talking about you behind your back all weekend. To Julie, I've been saying, man, the people here are not victims. They're coming in looking for ways to help or be helped, but always looking positively and empowering. So I'm just so excited about what's happening here. Despite all of that stuff going on, this is a very positive time, a very great opportunity for healing on this planet for all the people who want it. For those that don't want it, don't beat them up. Just be there for them if they decide they do want it. So let's go into some of this. Now, I've been banned on YouTube and Spotify, so if you feel uncomfortable about being here, you can leave now. You're in the right room. By the way, Morley Robbins, my buddy there, Morley's here. I don't know if you saw his talk on copper. Did you talk on copper? Today. Okay, so some of the stuff I'm going to do is I'm going to do it briefer because he can go deeper on it, which is awesome. Remember this is just a reminder, the power to heal is yours. It's not my words, it's right from the Creator. And that's where we get all of our power to heal. History here. I also serve on the board of Trinity, which I love Trinity School of Natural Health. Is everybody taking courses at Trinity or any graduates here? Right? All right. So everybody, by next year, I expect everybody to have at least one class, at least a health coach or something. So we're doing a lot of good stuff. So let's calm the cytokine storm that we're talking about here. You've heard of antibody-dependent enhancement or pathogenic priming. This is something I wasn't familiar with, although I'd heard some reference to it regarding attempts to develop coronavirus vaccines many, many years ago after the first SARS thing hit, the first SARS episode. And it turns out a year before the 2003 SARS episode, there was apparently a paper that, or some kind of patent that was issued to these things called spike proteins, measured on the nanoscale, I think 10 nanometers or something, really small spike proteins. But didn't know about all of that then. Now we know all about spike proteins. Turns out, apparently, patent made 2002, first SARS outbreak 2003. And so now the concern I have was not initially my concern, but in interviewing and talking with many of my friends who are in the physician community, the regular allopathic physician community, and PhD researchers, that have brought up this concern that those who are getting this experimental jab, this gene therapy to elicit spike protein production, are also facilitating, when they next encounter what they call normally circulating strains of viruses or colds or flus or whatever they may be, that those people are set up to, if they have any energy left at all in their body, to react with such vigor that it would be like a Category 6 hurricane in their body. So if we think about anybody lived in Florida like I have, you know about hurricane season. Category 1, before we moved out of Florida, we got hit by Category 1. It was still scary. I mean, the winds are howling, stuff's flying around. Imagine Category 5. Now imagine a Category 6, which theoretically, well, it doesn't exist. And now imagine that immune response in your body, and you'll understand the predictions of some physicians to say that people that have gotten the jab, if they survive the jab, they may be set up to die because of their own immune response. It's not something I look forward to. It's not something I want to happen. But if indeed there's any evidence and truth to it, I want to encounter or counter it the best of our ability for those we want to save. And maybe you are among them. Now, whether you've gotten the jab or not, you know, the risk of cytokine storms, it's just not fun when you're in the midst of one. You just got to shut down and recover. But unfortunately, in the case of Luc Montagnier, he's not a very hopeful man. I will give him credit for his intelligence and his integrity later in life as he began to understand homeopathy and things like that. But he was co-discoverer of HIV. He got a Nobel Prize. He says, for those that have gotten the shot, there is no hope, there is no possible treatment. For those who have already been vaccinated, we must be prepared to cremate the bodies. That's a total bummer. I'm like, no, I don't want to accept that. And he did say, interesting enough, that it's a vaccine that's driving the so-called variants. Interesting thing about variants, the tests for the variants, the delta, the gamma, the lambda, lambda, lambda. Every lab that says they've tested for the Delta variant is an independent lab that says we self-validate. You're like, what? You self-validate? And I was talking with Brian Hooker for today's show. In fact, you'll be on the show today. We pre-recorded it, my radio show. I was asking him about that. It's like, what is the basis of self-validation, self-verification? Is that legitimate? I mean, can you peer review your own article? Yeah, I have a peer-reviewed publication. Yep. Who peer-reviewed? I did. It's your article? Yeah, it's my article. I peer-reviewed it. It's awesome. Who would get it? Yeah, that's legit, right? And so we have labs that haven't even gone up to the federal level to ask for an emergency use authorization on any of these so-called variant tests. So whether they're variants or actually just renamed side effects or direct effects of the jab, you know, who knows? I have my perspectives on it, but we've got a whole mess in the scientific community of not science. Now we know, of course, of the whole manifestation of gain of function. These stories, real or imagined, they create, you know, scary monsters in our consciousness, so that we believe, you know, the latest or next virus that comes around, and then we succumb to that fear and we do whatever they tell us. So we live in a state of fear, which is how I opened the event yesterday with my talk about fear. Fear is the great controlling factor. If you know more than they know, you have nothing to fear except their stupidity or their arrogance, their ignorance, or their malice. And then we have to go beyond that. Now, vaccine researcher admits big mistake, spike protein is a dangerous toxin. This is more or less what I'm seeing and hearing, that these minute proteins, artificially induced or created, are indeed damaging. They're toxic, but they also have very physical properties, as any kind of tiny needle would have, interacting with cells at that most basic interaction with the cell, at that level. That if they spike proteins are manifesting within the vascular system, particularly within the microvasculature, the microcapillary beds, the venous system, you will see the monocellular lining, the endothelial lining punctured, and you'll see cells, red blood cells punctured, inability to carry oxygen, bleeding events, coagulation events, strokes, different things that are happening because of this. And I think that's a more rational explanation than a virus that we don't tend to catch in the act of doing anything. in real time. We don't see it. We imagine what it's doing as opposed to actually seeing it happen. So spike proteins are, I think, more explanatory of what may be happening here and what we need to then look at and say, how can we deal with this? The University of Hawaii reported out of China, this was all during the coronavirus scare around the world, that in areas where selenium was highest in China, in the soils and in the people, there was little to no manifestation of what they call COVID-19. In areas where selenium was low, that's where you see the biggest manifestation. This is not a new story. I've been speaking about selenium for years. My dearly departed friend Chris Barr, who spoke here regularly, not a doc, he passed recently, was talking about selenium as well. Selenium being so key to everything. In fact, back in the 1990s, when I first got into radio at the end of the 90s, I was reporting on Ebola infections and how that peer-reviewed medical literature was showing that re-supplementation or reintroducing selenium into the diets of the people that were suffering with Ebola, it was reversing Ebola. You didn't need an antiviral. In other words, selenium is Dr. Buttar calls it birth control for viruses. All right, selenium. So healing at the speed of silver is where we started. I've lectured for many years around the world on silver. I'm going to go briefly through this to let you know that silver at the nanoscale, when you get to the point where you remove an electron, you have an ion, now you have a positive charge. That positive charge is the bioactive form of silver in the body. And that has a lot of properties that are very important to understand here, but it's only part of the story, but it's an important one not to overlook as well. Now, when we look at the bioactivity, we can assess this through transmission electron microscopy, which is how we analyze metals at that level to see, some of their properties, what are the size, and that we can indicate, what is the functional efficacy within the body, because if you have even high concentrations of debris fields that you can't see with the naked eye under electron microscope, you can see large high concentration silver formulas often have no bioactivity or very limited bioactivity. So I've worked with the bioactive silver hydrosol for many years because of, one, it has site-specific anti-inflammatory properties. Remember I talked about systemic versus site-specific? Silver, site-specific. If you can deliver silver to the point of foci, for instance, in the sinus cavity, boom, easy. You can reduce the cytokine storms locally. It's a very localized activity, even though there's a systemic immune benefit to some degree. But silver works site-specifically mostly. It does facilitate regenerative with its properties to heal tissue. Again, site-specifically. You deliver to the wound. This is why burn centers around the world use silver-based topical drugs to recover tissue. Now, we're dealing with, to some degree, tissue inflammation and damage, although at a very deep level that we would need to reach site-specifically if we can, so that we can get benefit. Now, if you're concerned about viruses, silver ions can disrupt the outer protein coat of a virus, can bind and denature its protein capsid structure, and it can even penetrate the viral wall and bind to the DNA or RNA. It's theoretically or actually taken from you. So in any case, silver is virostatic. It stops viral replication, which is great. It's just you got to make sure you can get it there, right? There's a systemic aspect to viral activity. It's usually not just local. So you could take it orally and that's fine. You're going to have some benefit there as well. Silver also enhances the production of reactive oxygen species, ROS, or what your own immune cells, your B lymphocytes in particular, utilize to disrupt and disable the metabolic and respiratory pathways of bacterial species that are overgrown, fungal, and even viral interaction. So there is an immune modulation aspect because silver and oxygen have such a strong affinity for one another. It facilitates powerful immune responses to help you. But what happens in a systemic cytokine storm, we may not necessarily want to elicit even more of that storm, right? So these are the delicate discussions we must have in utilizing each substance appropriately, okay? Now, in terms of epithelial tissue regeneration, this was a 25-day study where they looked at the active nanoparticles of silver versus silver sulfadiazine. This is the standard in medicine. And at 25 days, the silvadine had some evidence of healing of a wound that's a third-degree wound care burn model in an animal model. And the silver nanoparticles that are more active at 25 days, it's like the wound never occurred. Complete recovery. Complete, beautiful cosmesis, no scar tissue formation. So we have benefits from silver that are undeniable. This is the hydrosol I use for doctors. They have the Argentin 23, and they told me this weekend if you want to get 20% off, you can get 2 bottles or at least, but $49 or $50 for free shipping. So you can go to sovereignsilver.com if you want to get this. It's available in stores pretty much all over the place, but if you want to go direct, say hi to Natural Immunogenics for me. They also have the Argentyn 23, but that's usually sold only through doctors. But at choosetobehealthy.com, one of the supporters of the Robert Scott Bell Show, choosetobehealthy.com, he does carry the Argentyn 23 even if you don't have a doctor and you want to get the 23 part per million version, and use the code RSB5 if you go to choosetobehealthy.com to get a little discount there. Now, transitioning to copper. From silver to copper, we know that silver can do all the things I've just laid out for you. But copper may be, in fact, the most critical mineral in this particular circumstance because of what we're challenged with a cytokine storm that could be deadly. Because we move from site-specific inflammation reduction, cytokine reduction, to systemic cytokine storm reduction. Now, in modern medicine, God bless the doctors, bless their hearts, they will try, and I don't mean that they mean to kill you, although some, I don't know at this point. But they will use very powerful anti-inflammatories, steroidal hormones, prednisones, things like that, that can, yes, destroy your immune system, destroy your liver. So if they mean well, they're trying to keep you alive. I understand that. But they could also be killing you because of the destruction to the immune system in the liver as well in that context. So if we can sustain a uniform reduction without suppression, without damage to the liver, we could save people's lives in a crisis like this and not kill anybody, but save them all. And I believe copper will play a huge role here. Now understand that the history of minerals in the 20th to 21st century is the depletion over the course of modern agricultural practices. If you're not eating organically grown food, you are working against yourself, or the equivalent of organically grown food, because every bit of that food contains toxic poisons that those minerals have to be used up to counteract. And those minerals have been depleted because of the chemical agriculture, the destruction of the soil. And so we see the various minerals listed on the right side. If you remember from the periodic table of elements, copper is Cu, cuprum, and it was the most significant loss in vegetables over many, many decades now. Almost 80% loss in copper in the soil. And most people aren't eating food that was rich in copper to begin with. That used to be what our ancestors did because we ate things like what? Desiccated liver, right? How many of you eat liver every day, every morning? I'm hanging out with you. What's for breakfast, right? Raw liver. Oh, no, I don't know, man. It's a little tough, right? He's tougher than me. But you can supplement. All right, that's good. But there are, bee pollen contains some copper. So there are other dietary ways to get it in, and we're going to talk about one of the most profound new ways that we can get it in the immediate bioavailable form. But of course, we're concerned for not only copper deficiency, but if you take the wrong form of copper in a supplemental form, a lot of the amino acid chelates are not fully utilized, or if at all, by the body appropriately, and can create copper toxicity. And often copper toxicity results in anger issues. Very interestingly, copper and liver are very connected. And if you know about the liver meridian and how it can hold emotions like anger, you can find people taking copper supplements. They have these weird outbursts and very angry disposition, and out of the blue, you don't know where that comes from. But when you have the right amount of copper, things are going well. In fact, so much. Now, the concern we also have is the copper-zinc balance. We've heard bonkers, everybody's been doing zinc. Zinc, zinc, zinc. COVID, zinc, zinc, zinc. And because of that, whatever little copper people had is being thrown even further out of balance. So we are causing more problems perhaps than we're actually solving, or maybe we're solving a little bit, but really creating long-term issues and problems. Now, as an essential trace element, copper is the third most abundant mineral, according to science there. Without copper, many biochemical processes either do not happen or happen at a reduced level, which results in a range of health impairments. And so we want to understand, again, the critical role of copper that has been overlooked, and then get it in the right form. Food primarily, and then what I'm going to talk about in a moment as well. And as I said, I'm just going to have to go through this briefly, but thank God, Morley Robbins at 1 o'clock, you're going to be doing a copper talk, right? Right? And to confirm it, you're going to be there. Don't be not showing up. It's too important. And by the way, you have a book. What's that book in your hand? What's that called?
Copper is the cure.
Copper is the cure. How timely. Yes. Did you know I was coming? You're awesome. Copper is a cure. That Morley Robbins, you want to get that book. How Copper Works. Copper required for proteins called cuproenzymes. I mean, loads of cuproenzyme pathways. You cannot overstate the importance of copper and how the lack of copper results in all kinds of things. Now, many people know connective tissue, which is really a big issue, but cardiovascular and blood health, energy, metabolism is what I want you to understand about copper, at least for the sake of the discussion here, to save people's lives in a cytokine storm scenario. So we see the many cuproenzymes related to, it's completely dependent on copper, from ceruloplasmin to all the aspects of copper transport and iron utilization. And I'll hazard a guess that Morley will correct me if I'm wrong, that the vast majority of anemia diagnoses are absolutely wrong. You don't have low iron. You have 100%, pretty much, yeah. So if you're told you're anemic and you need iron, you don't. You need copper. Iron is one of the easiest things, most abundant minerals in the body and available in just about everything, even in depleted soils. So copper is the key to correct that. And again, Morley will go into more detail on that in his lecture at 1 o'clock. That's the beautiful thing for those of you who are watching this later, because these are going to be made available in a few months through the virtual version. So if you can't be at 1, it's okay, you'll be able to watch it later. So connective tissue, we talk about joint and bone health. That's why you see a lot of even the external, like the copper fit things, the socks and things. Some of it is due to its impact on joint and bone health, but also inflammation, reducing inflammation locally and systemically. So that's one of the things people know about. In terms of analogy, I think you can get, if you got a bunch of bricks and you just stack those bricks, they're not going to stay and remain. There's nothing holding them together. The copper is like the mortar without the copper. You just have a pile of bricks just falling down. You keep putting them up, they fall right back down. So connective tissue integrity. The entire connective tissue of the body depends on copper. Now, here's as important as it gets right now. What have we seen with the major manifestations of what they call COVID and even the post-jab manifestations of disease, illness, and death? Vascular, more than anything. Yes, pulmonary too. But we see damage at the most minute, smallest layers, the monocellular lining layers of the endothelium of the vascular system. Single cell thick. Now, if you've got 10 nanometer small needles puncturing these cells, and if enough of this is happening, you're going to have internal bleeding at a very minute level, microcapillary bed, but that's devastating, because those coagulating blood cells are going to end up transiting to other areas, to larger and larger areas, or smaller. Anywhere it goes, you can see deadly events occurring. Even aneurysms, much less, other vascular manifestations. And this is what we're hearing. Now, in the pulmonary system, there can be similar impact when you have the microcapillary beds interacting with the pulmonary system, the oxygen transport. And then we're also seeing a lack of oxygen transport. Isn't that a big issue with COVID manifesting? Reduced oxygen carrying capacity of the blood? You're like, where's that gone? Well, what's damaging the blood? Perhaps the spike proteins, but what else are we lacking? Copper to carry. Copper is critical. They say iron is iron. No, without copper, iron can't be utilized for oxygen transport. So we come back to that in a functional nutritional role here. Copper works in the capillary beds to maintain capillary bed integrity. My gosh, this is major league, and I'm not hearing enough people talking about this. That's why I'm here. That's why Morley's here. So how about this one? Now, this one perhaps is the secret to everything when we talk about cytokine storms. As you see, I highlighted this: conserves energy by reducing swelling. How do you interpret that? It means that it's reducing the inflammatory response, reducing the cytokine storm, not through suppression like allopathic medicine, like a prednisone that just shuts it down, right? But it facilitates a rapid recovery so that you no longer need to be in that state as an immune system of fight or flight. Very orderly it does this, but very rapidly and systemically. So the key in understanding reducing or conserving energy is what? What did I say? When you are in a state of fight or flight, you're running away from a bear that wants to eat you, or Fauci, and you're just like, I'm getting out of here. It's like, you can do that for a short burst while, but unless you're an Olympic athlete, and even then, you can only go so long until you're collapsing. What was it? Was it the story of Pheidippides that ran the 26 miles, or who was that? And then collapsed at the end? the idea of you have reserves, but if you exhaust those reserves, you're done. And that's the point of the category 6 cytokine storm. Whatever reserves of energy you have are depleted so quickly that you're done. There's no vital force left to work with that physical body you have. And so we've got to understand, how does energy work? How does it utilize? What does it rely upon? Copper, big time copper. And so this is critical to understand. So you see this pathway manifesting, because they're not going to spell it out for you like I'm trying to spell it out for you. When you say conserving energy, it means you're getting out of fight or flight. You're getting out of the cytokine storm, and suddenly you have energy again to live, to survive the onslaught, the injury, the wounds, the sickness, the challenge. So copper is going to be one of the most important roles. Now, this company that I mentioned, Sovereign Silver, they are coming out with Sovereign Copper. It should have been here already. I apologize on their behalf, but it's basically a stupid unit dose carton printing that has a problem. So any day now, this is October 2021, you should have access to this most unique form of copper ever brought out. 2 forms of copper that the body utilized for the different Cooper enzyme pathways and other things that Morley can go into more detail on in his lecture. Copper 1, copper 2, copper 1, copper 2. Now, when you take copper as a dietary supplement or in food, like liver, the body uses the digestive process as it's designed to do through the alimentary canal, whether it be enzyme activity, whether it be interaction with microbiome, all of these things. It takes complex molecules, proteins, other things, breaks them down for easy utilization across barriers that are normally there to protect you from things that aren't supposed to get in. We got a problem with digestion, big time, just about everybody, including me. That was my history. And that's why I've lectured all over the years about recovering the gut with what I call the silver aloe combination protocol, because site-specifically silver heals epithelial tissue, and it's tissue inside the gut. The aloe would carry it there. But let's just say you even have an ideal GI system, you still have to break down the copper from the food to get it absorbed and utilized in that copper 1, copper 2 form. What this has done is released it in a full-on pure water, pharmaceutical grade purified water, and copper 1, copper 2 in balance, stabilized. No one's ever done that. And a teeny tiny bit of silver for prolonged shelf life, so to speak, but it's just minuscule. So what you've got is an ability now to utilize liquid form of copper that's in that copper 1, copper 2 state, requiring no digestion. It will absorb mucosally, it will absorb in the GI. You don't have to swish and swirl, you can swallow it. And at the tablespoon or 15 ml level dose, this would be about 150 micrograms. Now, these are the RDIs, and Morley, you'll probably go into more whether they're legit or not when we talk about RDIs, how legit they are or not. But let's go with them for now. Average adult needs 900 micrograms a day. If you're pregnant, you need more. If you're breastfeeding, you need even more. Children need less. But to take the safe amount of silver in this bioactive form, copper 1, copper 2 form, we have now the safety to do so without risk. In fact, you can repeat the dose even for other things, because silver is also an antifungal. Interestingly enough, anti-parasitic. Oh my gosh, what have we heard about anti-parasitic drugs? Seem to be of great benefit, right? So I'm giving you the non-drug option, even though I acknowledge that those drugs, that the ivermectins and the hydroxychloroquines of the world, are far less toxic than most drugs. But as a homeopath, if I don't have to use even those drugs, I'd prefer that. But if you do, I know that they're not really killing people the way other drugs are. But we might be able to supplant or reduce the need, if you can't get them, with something like copper. So a tablespoon a day, 2, 3, and if you do the math, you can do more than that. And even if it's a short burst life-saving interaction protocol at this level of bioactivity, you're likely not going to result in, and who cares if they have an angry outburst at that moment, right? Just get them through the crisis, they'll be fine, okay? So now, healing at the speed, is that all right, Morley? You can build on that. I know you can. It's going to be amazing. And I appreciate Morley. He's so well researched on this. Now let's go into healing at the speed of nitric oxide. This is another adjunct here. Now, I met my friend John Hewlett some years ago. He's a real patriot, a real lover of liberty, a real defender of this nation. And he came up with something so brilliant. It was inspired by God. I believe that with all my heart. This is a study by Dr. Malinsky, Tadeusz Malinsky, one of the top researchers in the world as it relates to certain things, including nitric oxide. And we know that we can facilitate the production of nitric oxide, which is in the endothelium primarily of the vascular system, by utilizing certain foods like beets or taking L-arginine, People know, if you know about nitric oxide, it's a Nobel Prize winning discovery, right, of this amazing molecule. But you facilitate the production or spike production, no pun intended on saying spike production, but a sudden production of nitric oxide. It's a quick burst and then it dissipates. That's one thing for normally, if you even do a dietary supplement to do it typically. But the other thing is that there's also a corresponding spike in production of something called peroxynitrite, which is a very dangerous free radical. So you have a good thing that's really amazing, helping to regenerate and protect the endothelium of the vascular system, like nothing else almost. And yet you have this other thing that comes up, and it's a challenge to that produces inflammatory events, oxidizing potential to damage tissue. And so we know that happens normally. So what he did was an analysis of this stuff, this actual formula called Cardio Miracle. This actual formula, took it and looked at it. The guy said to John Hewlett, said, look, you want me to study this, but what if I find out it doesn't work? He's like, well, that's what I want to know. I want to know what is this? And so he does the study and finds out, as he tells John Hewlett, Dr. Malinsky, you're a genius and you don't even know it. You have solved a problem you didn't even know existed. With this specific formulation, he was able to sustain the increase of nitric oxide over 24 hours or more, not just a 2-hour burst. And even better, he found that same overtime sustenance of continued increase of nitric oxide that protects the endothelial layer and regenerates the endothelial layer of the vascular system, that it reduced the corresponding production of peroxynitrite. So you got all of the things everybody wanted with the nitric oxide and none of the detriment of the rise of peroxynitrite. And it's like, this to me is a God thing, because he's not a PhD, John Hewlett. He's not an MD. He was a guy that was on death's door that needed this more than anything because he shouldn't be alive. Now, there's other discussion of nitric oxide and mitochondrial function, but that also comes back to copper as well. Copper in the mitochondria, energy production, very critical there as well. So John Hewlett, when he was 55, that's where I am now, but that was back in 2007. He was in the ER with an acute appendicitis. I mean, this guy was in cardiac failure. He found a peace, a resolve that he would find the better answer, something better than the recommended procedures that the doctors did for him, because he was on death's door at that moment. And he found it. He's got so many grandkids, it's ridiculous, but that's what they do in Utah. Well, he's awesome. What a kind, loving man, and again, a great patriot that developed this, and it's a miracle. That's why it's called Cardio Miracle, because he shouldn't have been able to do it. But some of the greatest advances in science didn't come from within the PhD circles. Is that true, Judy? Doesn't that happen sometimes? People with no PhDs figure stuff out. It's like, weird. How's that possible? So anyway, use the code RSB. If you want to take, I've been doing this now for over a year, and I didn't start at a dangerously ill perspective. I started at a pretty fit perspective, and now I'm running circles around at the gym I go to, these 20-somethings. They look at me and they're like, I'm their target. They're coming for me. And I'm like racing circles around them in my 50s when, remember, I had no energy in my 20s because I was so chronically ill. So this is an amazing thing. I have some packets here, but use the code RSB. And I've been taking that every day. I think, again, another critical aspect, how do we protect the endothelial lining that is being so damaged so rapidly? And so I come back to the Wolverine of X-Men. How do we regenerate as fast as Wolverine in the face of degenerative events? Assaults, bullets coming at us, needles, whatever it is. And these are the things that I'm talking about here in terms of silver, copper, nitric oxide. And if you're in a crisis, I take one of these packets or a full scoop a day, sometimes twice a day. In a case of somebody in the throes of this, I would be doing 3, 4, 5 times a day just to get through the crisis. There would be no toxicity in this case. And then we move to healing at the speed of hydrogen. How am I doing on the speed of this lecture? That's my question, because I usually go, whoa, okay, 10 minutes, we're good, we're going to make it. Hallelujah. So hydrogen, and how many of you saw Paul Bertiero yesterday speak on hydrogen? Okay, if you missed his talk, he's like Morley is for copper, Paul is like that for hydrogen. And he's got the Synergy Science booth. They've got the molecular hydrogen produced in the water there so you can drink it. But hydrogen, the first element on the periodic table of elements. Are there any elements before hydrogen? And did we discover anything? Because who knows? We could discover more tomorrow. It's an amazing time. What's that? Dr. Judy knows anything before hydrogen? Not yet that we know, right? So that would be cool though, wouldn't it? The early use of hydrogen in COVID-19 patients suppressed the release of cytokines. So we also know that H2 also facilitates a reduction in cytokine storm activity. So I wanted to give you, 4 solid things that you can do if you can't get hydroxy and ivermectin. Maybe you don't need it. I don't know, but I just wanted to give you these options. And this hydrogen is, again, it's a ubiquitous element in the universe. And even in our body, when we're healthy, if we eat a largely vegetarian diet with good fiber, in the gut, in a healthy microbiome scenario, the gut in interaction with the fiber would produce hydrogen gas. And that hydrogen gas can be used all over the body almost instantaneously. There's little to no obstacle for hydrogen in the body. And it facilitates a lot of cell signaling modulation, a lot of things, as well as another antioxidant activity. It can bind with harmful hydroxyl radicals and neutralize them, really turn them into water, like the OH to add the H2 to it. It's going to be great. Fantastic. I'm getting a nod from Brian Hooker. I always feel like, dude, if I get a nod from Brian Hooker, I'm doing something right. I'm like, thank you, my brother. Thank you, my brother. So we have antioxidant potential of hydrogen facilitating health for every organ system. Again, it's got no limitation to where it can go. Kidneys, right? What are they doing when you go into a hospital? Giving you remdesivir. It's destroying your kidneys and liver. But what happens if you know about Chinese medicine? The kidney-lung meridian is very connected. You destroy the kidneys, whatever lung function you had going in, which wasn't great, goes down, and they go, now we're justified to put you on a vent. Let's intubate you. Let's drug you and put you on a vent and kill you. And I lost another one of my friends, Richard Pearl, who owned a health food store in South Florida with his family for many years, an organic restaurant. And he was the one that got me into radio back in the 90s. God bless Richard Pearl. And he had the manifestations of COVID, and he was helping thousands of people down in South Florida. They would come to his store and he would get them on things. So I know he was exposed to everything. He worked his butt off and probably didn't rest enough. That's also the healer's curse. When you just want to help everybody and you don't care for yourself, don't fall and prey to that. Because if you don't care for yourself, you're going to be no good for anybody else, especially if you're gone. So Richard went in the hospital because he couldn't get the oxygen. Unfortunately, they admitted him as an inpatient then, and they wouldn't let his wife in. They wouldn't let any advocates in. And he would call me on the phone and say, hey, this is what's going on. And I'd say, well, get them to get you on the hydroxy, the ivermectin. They won't do it. They won't do it. And then, a few days later, they finally did it, but they only gave me 1 dose. I'm like, oh. And they said, they want me to take remdesivir. I said, don't take it, Richard. Don't let them. They gave it to him. He had nobody to advocate. He was so weak. And they killed him. They put him on a vent and they killed him. My friend Richard. And he's not the only story. This is the kind of killing fields we're dealing with in our hospital systems. Why people are saying, I do not want to go to the hospital. Do not take me no matter what. I'd rather die out here if I'm going to die. Maybe actually you'll live. Yes, ma'am. If you have an advance directive going in, it might, but if you have no advocate, oops. It may or may not be. I mean, I'm not in that system to know, but I have no trust or faith in those folks that are there. There are a few left that mean well. They're trying to get rid of them because they don't want the jab, so they're going to fire them, kick them out, and bring in what? The National Guard? Militarization of our hospital system? Oh, that's cardio miracle. Thank you. So hydrogen as well to play an incredibly important role. There are over 1,000 studies now on the benefits of hydrogen. If you go to hydrogenstudies.com or just go down and see Paul at his booth, and you can there's even a little portable unit. You can produce your own hydrogen in minutes, 3 minutes, and you can drink it. Or as I have in my home, the Echo water right under the sink. So every time I'm drinking hydrogen water. And in fact, I mix hydrogen water with my Cardio Miracle. There's so much on hydrogen for cell detoxification, cell hydration, strengthening the host immune system. Again, H2 is one of the simplest things you can do on a daily basis because you're going to drink water. Make it enriched with molecular hydrogen. There's my buddy Paul. We were at the Truth About Cancer a few years ago. I don't normally dress up like that, as you can tell. I had a discussion with my wife before I left because I usually dress up in a suit. I try to be like Jonathan Emord. I'm like, nah, I can't even. That's a millennial thing, but now I can't even. And so that's the machine I have, but I'm sorry, here we go. Yeah, there's the Echo Go. Now you can get that for like 127. It's discounted here, which is awesome. And then there's a picture, and then there, you can have machines that do all kinds of crazy things, but anything in there is going to help get the hydrogen in you on a daily basis. And then what Paul did anybody see his talk on EMFs? Yeah. This is another miracle. This is why I travel with this everywhere I go. This is a key shield. Now, we know of the discordant frequencies associated with EMFs, 5Gs, et cetera, even Wi-Fi's. Having this to produce what we call a stable field of electrons, a torus field that regenerates constantly, like a big donut, around and up and around. Depending on the size of the unit, you can cover your whole house or a whole building. And this is the only technology that I know of that has been double-blind, placebo-controlled, tested. So they did dummy ones and everything. And the researcher didn't know, and it's like, oh my gosh, they saw its impact on cellular regeneration. Because one of the things we know of in the EMF fields, our ability to regenerate from assault, from infection is reduced. What are we talking about here? Trying to become more like Wolverine. So you're doing all these good things, and then you're a strong EMF field. You live next to a cell tower. You're in a city block building with 500 Wi-Fi's charging at you. You're doing everything right, and you're being hammered with this. This can depolarize that field. This can reduce that, and also because the electron field is so rich and continually regenerating, can facilitate mitochondrial function and energy production so that you can be like the Wolverine, to regenerate in areas where you can't normally regenerate, or if you could, you're supposed to be up here and you're down here, simply because of the invisible waves bombarding you that you may or may not feel sensitive to or in the same intensity. My wife, when we brought this house unit in, which was the key, the home cell Swiss pine, that one. We brought it into our home some years ago back in Florida, set it in the center of the house. This is at the time my wife was suffering from pain constantly from what do they call a trigeminal neuralgia. It was a dental extraction gone wrong. So she was that's called the suicide pain. It's relentless. My wife, my gosh, what she's been through. And she would retreat by noon every day into the bedroom just to hide from the world and try to just suffer in silence. We put this in the house. 24 hours later, she's up in the afternoon doing stuff around the house. And I looked at her, I said, honey, what are you doing? She looked at me, she's like, oh my gosh. She's doing stuff. Still, I knew there was significant mitochondrial benefit, even though she's still dealing with the pain, but pain saps energy. Just like we talked about, being in fight or flight saps that energy, just robs everything the mitochondria is trying to produce. And suddenly she had it back. So it's not something we will never be without, just so you know. So let's see, where else we go? And then finally, just to remind you, economically, how troubling will it be if you've been saving and only working for and with Federal Reserve notes when they're basically printing trillions and trillions beyond your imagination? Since 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act set in its course, they're destroying your ability to work for something of value. You have to work harder and harder to get less and less. You get that stuff and you go, oh, it doesn't buy stuff. And they say, well, the toilet paper costs the same as last year. Well, that roll used to be this big, now it's this big. They trick you. That's how inflation works. And soon we'll have $1 trillion Zimbabwe notes, right? If we are not careful. So I'm urging you to look into other means of economic survival and viability. Yes, everything will come down to barter, but having an ability to spend like we're used to, we're culturally used to having, here, take this little thing. That has gold in it. It's not crypto, so it's not an invisible entity, even though people are all about crypto, and I'm all for, let's say, decentralizing money, but I don't know. I'm not an expert there. So if you're interested in that, I have some of that. I'll be down on Radio Row afterwards, setting up and doing some interviews and maybe some more silver shots if you want more information on Cardio Miracle. But these are the goldbacks. They're legal tender in New Hampshire, Nevada, and Utah, and more states coming on board. Even countries are interested in this because they know how desperate their countries are going to be when their money, paper money, goes to nothing, to zero. So that's another thing I feel responsible to have to relate to you all. And with that, I think, let me see how we do. Man, I'm excited. Oh my gosh, I got 2 minutes to spare. Any questions, real quick? Any questions? Yes, sir. The liver man.
I don't want that name to stay. What about naturally derived food sources for copper? I think avocados.
Yes.
Nuts.
Well, as I said, pumpkin, bee pollen. Yeah, there are other sources, and Morley will go into that even more. but supplemental forms that can get us up on an ongoing basis are going to be important from our diet. I agree. We need to also restore the soils so that that stuff is back again. In the meantime, that hydrosol is going to be a stopgap measure to save lives, a lot of lives. If you don't listen to my show yet, come on over to robertscottbell.com. I'm on 2 hours a day, 6 days a week. Everybody knows Super Don, my producer, right? Kevin, my buddy, Tuttle, he set up Fans of RSB Show on Telegram. It's a nice community. Everybody's sharing and joking and being silly. We need more silly. And God bless you all. Thank you for being here. Yes, one more question. Ozone 3? Yeah, ozone is an oxidative therapy. It has benefit. Of course, we're dealing with so much oxidative stress. You just be careful in managing it right, and it can be life-saving. But, facilitate the antioxidant protection of your healthy cells so they're not damaged as well. So, yes, ma'am.
You had said you're a homeopathic practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any specific protocol that you recommend?
Homeopathically, my friend Neil Schultz in Utah has developed a homeoprophylaxis and response to the jabs themselves. I don't have his email with me, but if you want to come to my booth, I can give it to you. Or you can send an email to askrsb@gmail, my producer, Superdon, and put in the title Jab Reverse. And I'll forward it to Neil because he's got a formula that he's running tests on for everybody who's willing, from those who have gotten the jab or those who haven't, to see if we can help. Also, I have a 1-hour lecture on demand at trinityschool.org on clinical homeopathy, talking about restoring the terrain through homeopathy. That's the liver, the elimination system, the assimilation system, digestion and assimilation, and systemic free radical inflammation. Homeopathically, it's a 3-pronged approach, the clinical approach to drainage, and that's available at Trinity's website, trinityschool.org, for download on demand. Yes, sir. Booth, I'm in the back of the hall, radio row. You'll see where Pastor Greg is. I'm on the other side of that. And I'll be there after this event. And then we have the mental health panel this afternoon. I'll be moderating that as well. No, you can get it right here, or you can go to goldback.com if you want to order it and have it shipped to you. People are all over trying to get it because they want to be able, and the idea is not to hoard it. The idea is to start spending it instead of Federal Reserve notes and teaching others so that when the Federal Reserve note collapses, you're not then going, oh, what do I do? Right? It's sort of like preserving and growing your own food. I'm going to start when I have no food. That's not a good plan. You got to start doing this now, folks. Start doing it now. So thank you. God bless you. God bless the folks here that run this thing. The power to heal is yours. Thank you so much for being here.